All right, guys, this is Mr. Cannon here, and today we're going to be looking at democracy and what is democracy and what kind of democracy do we have in the United States. We do not have a pure or direct democracy in the United States. We have something called a republic. But anyway, that's what we're going to be looking at today is where did this whole idea even come from? All right, let's start with the type of government we actually have in America. A lot of people get confused about this, and you'll hear people say we are a democracy or we're a republic. And the truth is we are a mix. We're a constitutional democratic republic, and this is a very specific type of democracy. It's not a pure democracy by any means. It's a democracy where we have representatives that vote for us, which we'll be talking more about in a later slide. But our founders were very specific about what kind of government they wanted to set up. And the point of a constitutional democratic republic is that in America, our laws can't go against that founding document called the Constitution. All of our laws passed by our representatives have to follow the Constitution. They cannot ever go against the Constitution. And one of the jobs of the courts are to check and make sure that those laws are abiding by the Constitution. So, if you really want to know what type of government we have in America, we are a constitutional democratic republic. And let's look and see what are the differences between a pure democracy and a republic. Okay, our founders are going to take their beliefs from a lot of different philosophers in Europe. And one of those philosophers, those political philosophers, his name was John Locke. And there are two things that John Locke believed that our own founders are going to take when they go to establish our government in America. The first is called the social contract, and the second are called natural rights. Now, our founders, we're going to break away from England in a document called the Declaration of Independence. That document was written by Thomas Jefferson. It is not a document that actually sets up our government. That's the Constitution. But the Declaration did lay out what we believe about government, especially that second paragraph of the Declaration of Independence. It says this is what we believe about government, what good government should look like, and this is the kind of government we want to set up. Part of that government, that idea of a good government, was under the social contract. And John Locke's belief about the social contract was that a good government gets its power from the people. It doesn't take power from the people, but it gets its power from the people, and the people actually agree to be governed. It's not that I have no say at all in being governed. I actually give the government authority to make laws. I give that power to the government. The power is actually coming from me. In the second paragraph of the Declaration, it calls it the consent of the governed. I give my permission to be governed because I know, for instance, that we need to have speed limits, okay? I give the government the authority to create things like speed limits because speed limits are good for all of us. They protect all of us. So I give that power to the government. It's not that the government takes that power from me and says, we're going to do this. No, in a democracy or a type of democracy, the people give that power to the government. And if I decide, you know what, I don't want that government to have that power anymore, I can take that from them. That's called the social contract. And we're going to set our own government up based on the ideas in the social contract. Now, the second thing that Locke believed were these things called natural rights. And these were rights that he said, or our founder said, excuse me, came from God. In other words, they came from the Creator, and they are rights that no man has the authority to take away from us. Those rights under Locke's theory were called life, liberty, and property. All right. In our Declaration of Independence, Jefferson's going to change that last one from property to pursuit of happiness. He calls it the pursuit of happiness because it may not just be buying property. Your pursuit of happiness could be pursuing a career that you love or whatever it may be. But these were called the natural rights. And in the Declaration, Jefferson said these rights came from the Creator. They are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And in other words, government's whole job is to protect our right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That's government's job. Government's job is not to take things from us, it's to protect our natural rights. And in the social contract, we give the government the authority to protect those natural rights. We give them that authority. These are ideas that we take for granted today, guys. But these were pretty radical ideas for this time period in America and in Europe. And certainly we came from England. And England, when we write this declaration, we say, look, you are not governing us under the social contract. You are not protecting our natural rights. In fact, not only are you not protecting them, King George III, but you're taking life. You're taking liberty. You're taking our ability to pursue happiness. And so therefore, we're going to break away from you. And we're going to create a government that is going to protect our natural rights. We're going to create a government that is about the people giving their consent or giving their permission to be governed. These are very, very important things when we start thinking about what kind of government America actually has today, because they're based on these two things, the social contract and natural rights. All right, that gets us into this discussion of what are the different types of democracies, or, we're talking about making a government that abides by the social contract and a government that protects natural rights. Well, the best kind of government to do that is a democracy. But there are different kinds of democracies. A pure or direct democracy is a democracy where individual citizens vote on every single law. So you know this, we don't have this kind of democracy in America. We don't vote on every single law. We don't vote on speed limits. We don't vote on whether we're going to spend more money in public schools or not. We have representatives that do that. But in a direct democracy, the people, every individual citizen, votes on every single law. Greece had the first type of democracy, and then Rome is going to expand on that. But Greece was the first, and you can see there in the picture there, power to the people. That's what the democracy was all about, is the people having power. So a democracy is where the people rule themselves. A direct democracy, the people vote on every single law. That's how they rule themselves. They actually vote on every single piece of legislation. In a republic, it's a little bit different. In a republic, people elect representatives to vote on laws for them. So I vote on a person that I believe is educated, knows the issues, and will vote the way basically I want them to vote. But there are too many of us. If you think about America, there are too many of us to vote on every single law. That's all we would spend our time doing, is sitting around voting, and we don't have the ability to do that. I mean, people have to go to work and have to do jobs. So we vote on representatives to vote on laws for us. That's what we have in America. We have a republic, and specifically, as we said earlier, we have a constitutional democratic republic. So this is an important distinction between these two types of democracies, or these two types of governments of the people, because that's what a democracy is. It's a government of the people. In America, we still have a government of the people. It's just that the people don't vote on individual laws. We have representatives do that for us. So the question is, why a republic? Our founders looked at direct democracies, and they were fearful that a democracy would lead to mob rule. Now, how that would work out is, in a democracy, if every person's voting on every single law, then that would mean you could have a tyranny of the majority. In other words, you could have a majority, let's say you have 52% of the people. Well, if you're voting on a law, every single law, then 52% of the people are going to overrule the 48% of the people. And what the fear was is that the majority would take away rights from a minority. Now, let's give an example of when that actually tried to happen in America. Think about civil rights. Think about in the South. It wasn't just in the South, it was all over the country. But civil rights after the Civil War, after Reconstruction, for a 100-year period, African Americans were treated as second-class citizens. And the majority of white Southerners, and white people all over America for that matter, were okay with that. So they allowed that to happen. Well, the civil rights movement came along, and you had these leaders, both African American and white leaders, who said, this isn't right. This violates our Constitution. And so our representatives, including the president, including our Congress, including the courts, they overruled these laws that discriminated against African Americans. Even though it's going to take a while for a majority of Americans, white Americans, to say, yeah, we need to do this. Before a majority of white Americans actually agreed with it, already the government was overturning some of these discrimination laws. So that was why our founders set up a republic. Their view was that you want to have a buffer. You want to have a buffer between the majority and between our laws, so that if the majority wants something that's not good for the minority, like the civil rights movement, when the majority were taking away rights from the minority, then the representatives can step in and stop it from happening. Now, is this a perfect system? No. I just told you for 100 years we had African Americans being treated as second-class citizens. But ultimately, the republic, the representatives, were able to step in and take over and not allow the majority to continue to overrule the minority. Now, even in our republic, if 90% of the American people are against something, it's very hard for our representatives to overrule that. You still have to have a good amount of people with you in order to do something. They think about a war. If a war is very, very unpopular, our politicians are going to bring those troops home. Our president is eventually going to bring those troops home, because it's just very hard to win elections when the people don't like what you're doing. So we still can have a tyranny of the majority, but we do have a buffer. We have something that comes in between the majority and the law. And those are called representatives. Ideally, representatives will study the issues and will be smart about the issues and will vote in a way that is intelligent and not just based on emotion. That's why you have a republic. We got to be very clear again. This is not always perfect. It doesn't work out perfectly, but that's the idea of why you have a republic. All right, let's talk about voting, because in America, the way the people give their consent, we talked about the consent of the governed, or the social contract, where government gets its power from the people. The way we give that power willingly is through voting. We go, and that's how we have a say in our government. We vote for representatives. And those representatives ultimately are going to make the laws. They're going to make the decisions that are going to affect all of us. So voting is a very, very important thing that we do in our republic. It's not the only way we can participate. You can call, you can email your representatives, you can protest in the streets, you can give money to politicians and to lobbyists to try to get things that you want done. But the biggest way that we make a difference as individual citizens is through voting. So we vote on elected officials. And when people don't vote, they're giving up some of their power and giving it to the ones that do vote. Let's give an example. An example would be if you had a large number of people under 40 not voting, but a large number of people over 60 do vote. then what's happening is people who are older are having more of a say than people who are younger. Younger people are, in other words, giving up their rights to older people, which is why it's important to vote, because that does happen, by the way. People 18 to 30 tend to vote way less than people who are 60 or 55 and over. And so those that are 55 and over have more of a say in their government than people who are 18 to 30 years old, because they vote. Because the older people vote and the younger people don't vote. So when you don't vote, you're giving up some of your power. Now, when we go cast our vote, in theory, we're voting for people who have studied the issues and who are experts on policy. You know, I might not be an expert on things going on in Russia, but the hope is when I go vote for politicians, for elected officials, they are experts on that, or they can at least talk to experts on that. And so when they vote, for instance, for a treaty with Russia, if we're trying to come up, if the president makes a treaty with Russia and the Senate approves that treaty, then ideally that treaty would be a good one because they've studied the issue. Now, we all know, guys, this is not how it always works out. Our politicians in often cases are not experts on anything. They're people who raise the most money to get elected. That's the cynical view of it, but that's also a little bit of truth in it as well. But it's why voting is so important, guys. If people vote, if people actually study their candidates and they vote for the best candidate, then theoretically they're going to get a better government. And I think we all want a better government. I would hope we all want a better government. But to get a better government, you have to actually study the candidates, where they stand on the issues, and you got to go vote. You have to vote. All right, so that's our lesson for the day. There was a lot in there. If you have any questions, of course, you can ask. But I think as you go through the questions listed in this lesson, you'll find that most of them were covered in this video. If it's not covered in the video, certainly you can look in the reading, in the text of the lesson, and that may help you. And then if you still are struggling with it, you can ask me a question, or you can ask Ms. Lekovich, and we'll be glad to help you. I hope you have a great day.